The Suns have fired Frank Vogel, the former champion coach with the Lakers. Was fired after a couple of years there, after he was fired for a couple of years at the Magic, after he had a really good run in Indiana, is fired after 1 year in Phoenix. And I just don't get it. Like, clearly, there's something about Vogel. Like, when you go 2 years in multiple stops, like, or less than 2 years, as much as I think he's a really good basketball coach, I'm like, all right, he's probably not faultless here. But the Suns are just a disaster. And I hate that coaches sometimes just get fired because they can't fire the players and the owners won't fire themselves. And ultimately, that's what happened to Frank Vogel here. Like, Frank Vogel's a fine basketball coach. Is he the best basketball coach in the league? Maybe not. Definitely not. Like, that guy's name's Eric Spoelstra. But is he the best basketball coach in the league? No. Is he a perfectly good basketball coach who probably deserves... Is he one of the best 30 NBA coaches on the planet? Yeah, probably. Is it possible in 1 year to be great and build something with a bunch of pieces that don't fit? Probably not. But that's my thing is like, what do you... Phoenix made disastrous roster decisions, mainly in thanks to their owner, Matt Ishbia, who thinks that he's a basketball guy and isn't. He's a mortgage guy who rips people off. If you've listened to some of the reporting or read some of the reporting about how he runs his mortgage business, man, it's not good. And so, if they've got this rich dude who is, by the way, consulting with his best friend and childhood idol, Isaiah Thomas, on all these decisions, a dude who the NBA is begging him not to hire for real, and all of a sudden Frank Vogel's got to get fired for that? I mean, I'm sure the check's nice. I'll say that. What did Frank Vogel sign? Frank Vogel contract. Is he getting triple paid right now? No, let's see. Last year, Vogel signed a 5-year, $31 million contract with the Suns. They let him go after 1 year.
It's getting ridiculous, Craig. It is getting ridiculous. What you just mentioned about Matt Ishbia, I think you also got to take a look at James Jones as well. I'm not going to lie, though. A couple of years ago when James Jones was making all these moves, everybody was singing their praises.
Looked like he was cooking.
Exactly.
I mean, James Jones comes out of that Miami, like, he spent a lot of time down there. He's got the nickname Champ for a reason.
Yep.
And, like, he understands what makes good teams. I don't think these are James Jones moves.
You think them trading for Bradley Beal was more so a James Jones or Matt Ishbia?
Think about it. The Durant deal was on the table for Brooklyn. Mm-hmm. Is it not last summer? 2 summers ago, right?
2 summers ago.
Yeah, 2 summers ago. Under the old owner, Robert Sarver, who sucked for off-the-court reasons, right? But Sarver was like, nah, we're not doing this. And Jones clearly did not lobby to be like, no, we've got to do this, right?
Yeah.
James Jones, I think, was probably advising Sarver, and in general, this is not a good deal. Giving up Mikal Bridges, all, like, as much future draft capital as you basically were allowed to in one trade. Who else they give up? They gave up, like, another young player, I think.
Cam Johnson.
Yeah, Cam Johnson.
Yep.
Like,
they gave up their whole bench. Correct?
They gave up their whole bench, which had just helped them go to the finals to get Kevin, or to try to trade for Kevin Durant. And this is when they had Chris Paul, and they didn't know that Chris Paul was probably done at that point, right? It's coming off the finals. And Brooklyn was like, we ain't really that interested. And this is when KD is like trying to bust his way out, and then they made nice, and then eventually things turned when Kyrie went sideways, right? So this is the summer before all of that goes down in Brooklyn, when KD is like throwing a little hissy fit to try to get out. Mm-hmm. And the Suns are like, nah, we're good. Then in the as the trade deadline approaches, now Matt Ishbia owns the team. And they make the same deal even though they have all the leverage on the Nets. And I realize the Nets could have just been like, well, fine, we'll keep Durant, we'll play this out and see what happens this summer. So like it wasn't all or nothing in terms of that. But they ultimately decided when Ishbia got there that the same deal that was on the table was worth making.
Yeah, I
think it's Matt Ishbia.
Okay, I mean, well, if it is Matt Ishbia, he has to, put the blame somewhere because he definitely didn't put it on himself when he spoke a couple of weeks ago.
No, he thinks, well, that's also the problem, right?
Exactly.
It's like, because this is Matt Ishbia and because James Jones executed what Matt Ishbia wanted, then he thinks he said it.
Yeah.
The roster's great. Well, if the roster's great, then it's not the roster's fault. It's not the person who constructed the roster's fault. It's got to be the coach's fault. Yeah. And at that point, this is the obvious outcome that we should have seen the second those words came out of Matt Ishbia's mouth. But also sometimes, like, it's sports' fault, right? Like, this is I think the bigger picture. Like, if you want to look at Phoenix in particular, like, they've got some very specific issues. But, like, generally speaking, there's just no patience from way too many owners and way too many fans. And I think that's related because I think a lot of fans act like owners. Or a lot of owners, act like fans. Fans wish they could act like owners. But a lot of owners are just big fans. They don't actually know anything about the sport. They actually don't know what it means to drop, or to build a team over time, to have the patience. They just think that we can shortcut some moves and assemble a roster piece by piece, and if it doesn't work in year one, then... But look at the teams that have won recently. The Nuggets were a project over time that Stan Kroenke, their GM, allowed Tim Connolly to build. Connolly ultimately left, and now he's in Minnesota, and look what he's built in 2 or 3 years there. It doesn't have to take forever, but you have to have some patience with your core. And your staff, you have to get the hire right on the front end. Like there was a lot of pressure in Denver to fire Mike Malone. It was pretty clear Mike Malone was an awesome coach. Like, the Kings screwed up. The Kings had Mike Malone, and they fired him. Like idiots, because that's what the Kings do. They got lucky then that they found a trade that actually wound up kind of working for all sides, but they get De'Aaron Fox and Sabonis, or the Fox they draft, and then they get Sabonis in the Halliburton trade, which in hindsight, you're like, did you get the second best player in that deal? Maybe, but I don't know that Fox is Fox if Halliburton's still there, and I don't think Halliburton's Halliburton if he's still having to play off De'Aaron Fox. They're too similar of players, so they got, a really good compliment to De'Aaron. But they had Mike Malone to make it all work, and they screwed it up, and Denver's like, okay, fine, we'll take one of the best coaches in the league. And Denver goes and wins a championship. Milwaukee a couple years ago, like, they could have blown that core up sooner. They didn't. They let Middleton, Holiday, and Giannis cook, knowing that, like, hey, if we're winning 60 games, we're probably pretty good. Eventually, we're gonna come through in the playoffs. The Lakers in the bubble are the exception. The Warriors were a homegrown, home-cooked team. The Spurs were a homegrown, home-cooked team. Like, look at who wins. There are potential shortcuts, right? Even the Raptors, I would say, yes, Kawhi was the most important piece, but a lot of that team was homegrown, and Kawhi fit their culture. And teams just don't have, like, it's one thing to, if you're the Raptors are actually the perfect example, right? The Raptors build this core around Lowry and DeRozan, and they rise up, they're the number 1 seed, and they get curb stomped by LeBron somewhere in the playoffs. Every single year. It didn't matter whether the Cavs were the 2 seed, the 1 seed, the 4 seed, the whatever. They were going to face the Raptors, and LeBron was going to embarrass him. He was their daddy. And eventually you just go, if you're Masai, you go, this ain't good enough. We got to try something else. Mm-hmm. And I respect them for that, for being like, hey, we gave it our legitimate shot, and it didn't work out. But what they didn't do is, after getting beat once, try not to improve and run it back with keeping what works. But the Suns are like, they make the finals once, they blow up half the team. They chase a star. Does the star fit? Doesn't matter. We got Kevin Durant. Hey, we got Bradley Beal. He's made an all-star team. What can we give away? And by the way, he's got the worst contract in the league. And now they fire the coach after 1 year? Like, in some ways, ready to make some people upset here, this is an offshoot of the Kirk Cousins, Michael Penix thing. If you want to make some of these moves, fine. To make them all together is nuts. It's not like Frank Vogel, they didn't know what he was a year ago. All the same dudes hired him. Frank Vogel didn't change who he was in a year. If you thought he was the right dude last year, why are you firing him now after you gave him $31 million? I don't get it.
Do you think we're at the end of an era where we have these coaches that have been with franchises? I mean, Pop, he's been with the Spurs for super long time.
No.
Eric Spoelstra, I think he's the closest.
No, because I think there will always be good organizations and bad organizations because there's good and bad owners. Good ownership will find the right guy, go through good processes, identify talent, and then let that talent cook for a long time. Irrational, impatient ownership, a.k.a. bad ownership, a la Matt Ishbia, will fire a coach every other year and wonder why he can't build anything.
But the Lakers, I think they had sustained success for periods of time with, the Phil Jacksons of the world.
Yeah, but I mean, Phil, it's hard at the end. I mean, I would also argue the Lakers are making mistakes.
Yeah, they are.
Right? Like,
yes.
So you can't look at what they're doing and be like, oh, well, we're reaching the end of an era when we're like, they're doing it wrong. They should do the thing that we say they should be doing.
Yeah.
So, like, this is what I think is going to happen with the Wizards. Like, I would anticipate whoever gets hired by the Wizards, especially if it's a young and up-and-coming coach, that coach is going to have, as long as they're success, like, they're going to have a 3 to 5 year run at least. And if they're successful, that coach is going to be here for hopefully a decade.
Okay.
Like, they're going to try to have the patience. I mean, we know Ted will be patient, but Winger and Dawkins look at it.
Yeah.
And actually, I don't know if I'll be able to pull the audio quickly in the break, but like Mitch Rales, I mentioned a podcast like last week, 2 weeks ago, that he gave this big long interview, and I finally finished it today. And I got to the part where he talked about the Commanders. And listening to Mitch Rales talk about success reminded me why I have so much faith for the Commanders. And I think a lot of the things he talks about have a lot of crossover to the Wizards. So we can talk about that. We'll get back to the officiating stuff later, but reacting to the breaking news that the Suns have fired Frank Vogel next on the Hoffman Show. We got Frank Vogel getting let go by the Phoenix Suns just 1 year into his coaching tenure out there in the desert. And I just think it's a bad job of hiring by Matt Ishbia and the group out there in charge. And I was listening to a podcast with Mitchell Rales, the Art of Investing podcast. Rales gave his first ever, as far as I know, like sit down, long form interview. And at the end, he talks about the Commanders and what they're doing and how they focus on getting to know people and getting to understand processes and like really soliciting feedback and listening to the right people. He told a story about how when he and Josh Harris got there, one of the things they did was they would sit down with like 10 to 12 players at a time and have lunch and just be like, what can we do that's better? And it was everything from like the shampoo and the shower suck to like, hey, it really is not very fun when we have home games and there's a bunch of visiting fans here. Like, how do we get we would like our fans to be our fans at FedEx at the time. Now it would be Commanders Field in Landover. And so there's like that human element of it. And he talked about how, when they think about how they build the organization, Adam Peters and Dan Quinn fit their vision. And like, if I were to ask you what the vision of the Phoenix Suns is, or better yet, Ant, if I were to ask Matt Ishbia what the vision of the Phoenix Suns is, he'd probably say something stupid like winning. Like, you can just say winning and win. And again, like, winning is a worthy goal. It's not about being kumbaya together and everyone having a great time. It's professional sports. The goal is to win. But just saying you want to win isn't good enough. Like, you have to have a strategic plan to achieve success. And I just think that organization, like, that ultimately is the Dan Snyder of it all with a guy like Ishbia and some of these other owners in sports, is because they don't have a strategic vision, because they don't have a plan that they're trying to achieve, they can't fulfill that plan. You can't chase something when you don't have a roadmap. You just throw darts and hope something hits. And look, if you're the Lakers, for instance, you hit every once in a while because LeBron James comes and plays for your basketball team and he erases all the other nonsense that you do. But overall, like I look at someone like the Suns as a pretty rudderless ship that needs to be way better at understanding like what the North Star is that they're going towards, and stop thinking that it's just a Larry O'Brien trophy that if you throw some darts at a wall that eventually you're going to hit one.
Yeah, it's not just the Suns, man. It's so many more of these other teams that trying to put together these super teams. Like super teams, as we're watching now, they aren't the way to go right now. You got the Nuggets, or one, I guess, all-star. You got the Timberwolves, couple all-stars, but for the most part, like, we don't have these guys taking up all the cap. We have well-rounded teams, and I just think the Suns, the way they put their team together, they didn't have any point guard. They don't have any rim protection.
No.
You got guys like Bradley
Their
Beal
whole thing was
missing.
like, we're just going to have stars and they're going to be great. It's like, that's not a good plan.
Yeah.
Like, we want to be an up-tempo. We want to be a defensive first. We want to be, it's like, I don't know, we're going to give the ball to Durant, Beal, and Booker, and they'll be awesome basketball players. And Vogel probably was like, no, we got to play a certain way, and whatever, and then he gets fired.
Yeah.
It's crazy, man. And that's the thing I think gives me hope for the Wizards, by the way. Like, when you look at the Timberwolves and how they've built it, when you look at the Thunder and how they built it, like, people knew Chet was awesome, but there was some risk there. I think when you look at, Shea, the acquisition, no one knew it was going to be this good. Nobody knew Jokic was going to be that good in Denver. Nobody knew that Anthony Edwards, even though we went 1-1 overall, like, nobody was like, yeah, that dude's going to be the best player in the league. And it looks like he's on that path. But there's certain things that they hunted, right? Like, Tim Connolly built the Timberwolves to try to beat the team that he built in Denver. He's like, in order to beat them, we need size, wingspan, length, and athleticism. And by the way, the folks in Oklahoma City thought the same thing. They're like, all right, who are we trying to beat? What is the current, like, the Nuggets are zigging and they're currently the best. When it's time for the zag to hit, are we the team to hit it? Okay, we're going to go back to size, length, athleticism. And like, Shea was probably a very pointed acquisition in that way. Chet, like, with his length and his shooting, like, that was something that they wanted. The Gobert trade was so panned. And I was definitely one of the people that did it. I was like, I remember when there was talk about maybe Connolly leaving Minnesota to come here. And I was like, okay, well, how do you explain hiring the guy who made the Gobert trade? And everyone was kind of like, yeah, you're just going to have to look past that one. That was a mistake, but he's really good otherwise. And now it's like, was that Gobert trade genius? Because that could be the thing that helps them win a championship. Because they have so much length and they have such an identity of a defensive prowess that he's central to. And they saw more for Gobert and helped him get to a new level than he was ever going to reach in Utah. And they had the patience to allow that to play out. So I think all of that stuff goes into it, but it starts with an ownership group with patience. And, for the Commanders, for the Wizards, like, those are the kinds of things that give you hope, far more than the rosters at the current moment, which definitely have a long way to go.
This is the Hoffman Show on the Team 980 and the Odyssey app.